Welcome to the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. The show covering all things health, wellness, culture, and more. The show for all of us who aren't old, we're better. Each week, we'll interview superstars, experts, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things, all related to this wonderful experience of getting better, not older. Now, here's your host, the award-winning Paul Vogelzang.
The sea forgets nothing. Beneath the waves, silent, endless, patient, lie over 1 million ships, wooden bones, iron hulls, shattered dreams. Every one of them once carried people, hopes, ambitions, and every one of them went down. Some fell in storms, some in battle, some under the crushing weight of greed or cruelty. But none of them disappeared because the ocean, as today's guest tells us, is the largest museum on Earth. Today, on the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series, we welcome Dr. James P. Delgado, renowned maritime archaeologist, National Geographic explorer, author of The Great Museum of the Sea, and someone who has stared straight into the ghostly face of history, from the deck of the Titanic to the haunted hold of the slave ship Clotilda. He's not here to tell us about treasure. He's here to talk to us about truth. Shipwrecks, he says, are more than stories of disaster. They're memorials. They're evidence. They're mirrors held up to our civilization. Its violence, its resilience, its yearning to cross the horizon, no matter the risk. And for those of us with a few more miles behind us than ahead, maybe that's what speaks to us. The idea that something lost can still teach, still inspire, still matter. So sit back, breathe deep, listen closely, because the ocean may keep its secrets, but today, Dr. James P. Delgado, Smithsonian Associate, is here to speak for them. Dr. James P. Delgado will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up. Please check out our show notes for more information about Dr. Delgado's presentation there at Smithsonian Associates. But we have Dr. Delgado today. I'm Paul Vogelzang, and this is the Not Old Better Show, Smithsonian Associates interview series on radio and podcast. Let's welcome Dr. James P. Delgado. Smithsonian Associate James P. Delgado, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
It is nice to see you this day, and I'm excited to talk about your upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation, as well as this wonderful new book, The Great Museum of the Sea. We'll get into that, but why don't we just kind of start at the start and maybe tell us briefly about your upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation, and tell us what you're going to tell us, maybe, and how you'll use Zoom to engage our audience. We're all on Zoom these days.
Absolutely. Well, in the past, when I've done presentations for Smithsonian, it's mostly been there in the building.
Yeah.
But what Zoom does, and where I think Zoom will help with this, is I can bring other sort of, visuals to play here. And with that, I think one of the reasons that I wanted to do it this way is because so much of my career has been involving the public through live broadcasts of some of the dives that we do. Back in the days that I was with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and working with partners like Bob Ballard and others to dive deep where people only go in a submersible, and more these days we send a robotic vehicle to explore, but then to share that live, streaming it. But it's also been, more recently for me, dives that have taken us into the very bottom of the Pacific and to the heart of a battle that changed the course of World War II, Midway, where last year and again this year, we were diving on the carriers that were lost in that battle, particularly Kaga and Akagi from the Japanese Navy and USS Yorktown. And so with that, what I want to do is, I'm expecting people will have read the book and they'll have questions. Mm-hmm. What I want to do is go a little bit further beyond the printed word, beyond the physicality of the book, and explore some of these things, to be able to interact with the audience, to share some thoughts, but to get some feedback and to answer questions. And with that, I mean, that's exactly what we've been doing with some of those other dives. As we're there, people can hear us as we are walking through the paces, thousands of miles away, bouncing off of a satellite as the ship hovers, in this case, 17,000 feet above USS Yorktown. What I like about being able to share something through a Zoom presentation is that I can bring other resources to play. And by that, I mean, I can show you exactly what we do when we do it through the power of telepresence and some of these dives where shipwrecks are investigated, not just by me, but by others, marine biologists, physical oceanographers, sedimentologists, naval historians, everybody together working. Most recently, when we were out in the Pacific, and when I say we, I mean a ship, the NOAA vessel Okeanos Explorer, with a robotic vehicle 17,000 feet down, and bouncing off of a satellite back to a Exploration Command Center in Silver Spring, Maryland at NOAA headquarters. I was there with a few colleagues, and at that point we were saying to the ship, okay, let's get ready, let's proceed. And as that robotic vehicle, having fallen for few hours, moves into position across the seabed. Suddenly, the hull appears out of the gloom. You move forward, and at that point, I'm not only seeing it, not only are the people on the ship seeing it, but anybody else who's tuned in on that website without a paywall is seeing it as well. So, with those kind of experiences, plus having spent a few years in documentary television, I appreciate the power of the written and the spoken word. But I also like when we can merge those with images, and that's what I want to do in this presentation, is not just talk about the book, but explore what it means to encounter and to deal with shipwrecks using the power of some amazing visuals.
Yeah, when I think about it, as you were talking, I just thought about that one number that you gave us, the 17,000 feet down. I mean, none of us get a chance to go down to that depth unless we're through this kind of means. It's just fascinating what shipwrecks can bring about. They're, they live in my imagination. They live in so many of our imaginations, and I wonder if you talk a little bit about why it is that shipwrecks captivate us so much.
The biggest things until we built Saturn V rockets that could take humans elsewhere. And through ships, for tens of thousands of years, we've used ships to connect ourselves to the rest of the world because so much of it's covered by water. And that water may have been a barrier for some very early humans, but not for long. And so they're part of our DNA. And in fact, the spreading of human DNA around the planet came through voyages. That's why on the island of Malta, you have people whose DNA speaks to every ancient culture plus the modern ones, because that island was a point of connection for trade and voyages and for people. So we care about ships. Even today, if we don't necessarily think much about them, we still care, particularly when a powerful story comes into the fore, such as a battle or something like Titanic, or even a vessel that nobody's really ever heard about until something goes wrong. And in that case, we just need to look to more recent history and the Andrea Gale, a fishing vessel lost in a perfect storm in the North Atlantic, which became an incredible book by Sebastian Junger and then an amazing movie. So we care about ships and shipwrecks for those reasons, but also because in that darkness, down there in that deep ocean, is a repository of our past as well as a stage on which the actors may have moved off, but we know the story. And to that end, having been on the deck of Titanic in a tiny submersible, nearly 13,000 feet down, looking out over this area where Lifeboat 8 had been boarded by some, but others could not. And in this case, it's Isidor Straus, whose wife gets out to join him because they've been together for so long and they love each other. And if he stays, she stays. And you see this lit up for your moment of, I guess, heartfelt sadness, which is the way I felt about it.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes very real. And so for those of us who care, for those of us who may or may not have had people who went to sea or some that never came home, but for any and all of us who understand and appreciate what it means to be human, these shipwrecks represent so much.
So well said. You're just a wonderful storyteller, and I feel all of those emotions as you're talking about it. Thank you for that. Eh, Your dives. You mentioned the Titanic, and I know you've dived into the USS Arizona. Diving can be such it's almost an isolating activity, but it's probably full of these wonderful emotions. What stands out to you as a moment that has stayed on as a maritime archaeologist? Because that's a fascinating career. I want to talk about that a little bit later, but maybe tell us about kind of some of those first personal reactions as you're seeing some of this come alive before you. Very personal.
Well, like all who study the past, particularly the more recent past, and for me, I mean, as much as I was fascinated with ancient history and human prehistory, it's really the last 500 years where there is more of a written record. So again, coming back to what I said at the start, it's one thing to read,
Yeah.
it's another to experience it.
Yeah.
And so for me, in many cases, the dives have meant, in a very surreal way, an opportunity to, I'll just say it, time travel.
Huh.
Now you can see the passage of years. You can see the grime of marinely encrusted and taken over a wreck. You can see the corrosion and the collapse. And yet, particularly after having made that fall, either in a dive suit or in a submersible into the darkness, when suddenly you're there and you see it, it no longer is a story. It's real. And with that, for me, suddenly being to these places and swimming those decks, I mean, I know USS Arizona in a way that few do now,
Yeah.
because so many of the guys that served on it who survived December 7th,
Mhm.
they're gone now. But I know the layout of that ship. I know that if you go this way, you can get to that part of the vessel, to this hatch. But with that, what you also know, coming back to what I said about Titanic, is that you know what happened here, there, and elsewhere. And even if that story's never been told, for me, I think one of those moments was on Arizona. My colleagues had pointed it out, and on my dive, I swam over to where on the foredeck there was a pile of fire hose. And as you looked at it splayed out on the deck, you realized that this is where a group of guys on that morning, as Arizona was burning, fought to put the fires out to try to save their ship and to save their shipmates.
Mm.
And they didn't make it, because where they were was where, when the final bomb went off, the ship exploded into a fireball. And those guys literally, I think, just vanished in that fireball. And that hose dropped, and you could see where it was deployed and where they were at the end. And again, I said time travel. In that brief moment, you could almost, in your imagination's eye, get a sense of what that was. A story forgotten because none of them made it. A story unknown, in fact, because none of them made it. Maybe somebody witnessed it and thought that's what happened. But there, thanks to the physical evidence of what the team saw on the deck, the story of their bravery and their sacrifice, once again, was back in human memory.
You have called the ocean the largest museum on Earth. For so many in our Smithsonian audience, we've visited a lot of museums. How is this one different? How is it different emotionally? How is it different philosophically? How is it different from almost a spiritual perspective?
Well, I chose my words carefully, particularly as not only am I a big fan of museums, including Smithsonian,
Yeah.
but I'm a former museum director. I spent 15 years running a museum. So when I chose that term, I chose it because this is a museum not curated by collectors or by curators. This is a museum curated by the simple flow of history and human action in other ways. And with that, it has no filters other than the deterioration of time or the circumstances of wrecking. It's also there for everybody to appreciate, and amazingly enough, when you're surrounded by the water, whether you're in a sub or just in a dive suit, you just feel the water around you. You don't hear much. And there it is. So your attention is focused, particularly when in the darkness you turn on a light and it's as if on a formerly unlit stage, suddenly there you are and see it. And that's been amazing. What's also important is that museums can talk about the sweep of human history, and there are some amazing ones, like the Smithsonian.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, you get a very focused look at different aspects of that experience, of our relationship to the sea, and of not just the ships themselves, but that which they carried. And there, in some of these cases, thanks to archaeology, we've been able to reconstruct ancient trade and connections. And I go back to the Ulubrun shipwreck excavated by archaeologists off the coast of Turkey, close to 3,000 years ago. And with that, what you're seeing is trade and connections from the Baltic all the way into subequatorial Africa to the Levant. In other words, a global economy in the Bronze Age. Talk about a great museum exhibit, not only there on the ocean floor, but ultimately when excavated and raised, and now in the Bodrum Museum of Underwater Archaeology in Bodrum, Turkey.
We've been hearing some remarkable stories, gripping, tragic, and deeply human from beneath the waves. And as Dr. Delgado reminds us, these wrecks are more than history. They're reflections of ourselves. Stay tuned for more from Dr. Delgado, including the tale of the Clotilda schooner shipwreck and its archaeology, how it reveals the brutality of the slave trade, the indifference to human suffering, and the crimes against humanity. Before we continue, a quick moment to recognize something very special. Above the surface, Smithsonian Associates, the presenting partner of this conversation, is celebrating 60 years of lifelong learning, curiosity, and connection. 60 years of wonder. Through live programs like this one, they've opened the doors to ideas and experiences for generations. Let's take a brief moment to acknowledge their anniversary and all the ways they continue to inspire minds of every age. Hi, this is Paul. Before we jump back into today's show, I want to take a moment to recognize a truly special milestone. Smithsonian Associates' 60th anniversary. Since 1965, Smithsonian Associates, the largest museum-based education program in the world, has been inspiring lifelong learners with unforgettable experiences, connecting audiences with the Smithsonian's museums, research, and experts in new and exciting ways. This year, the celebration is for you, with a full year of special programming both online and in person, from behind-the-scenes looks at Smithsonian collections to conversations with astronauts, historians, filmmakers, and curators. There's something for everyone. Smithsonian Associates has created something extraordinary. I'm proud to partner with Smithsonian Associates to share their incredible programs with the Not All Better Show audience. Thanks for being part of this journey. Here's to 60 years of curiosity, learning, and discovery. Our guest today is Smithsonian Associate James P. Delgado, author of the wonderful new book, The Great Museum of the Sea. Thanks, James, for sharing the book with me. I've just enjoyed it. The book is getting rave reviews online. I loved it. I'm not the only one. I want to just cite this fantastic review from the Wall Street Journal saying, James P. Delgado in The Great Museum of the Sea offers an encyclopedic but engaging history of all things related to ships, sailors, and their sometimes disastrous ends. No casual observer or mere shipwreck buff, Mr. Delgado is a maritime archaeologist who has chronicled countless wrecks in oceans and in lakes. The book is wonderful. Congratulations on the book and on all of the research that you've done. Thank you again for joining us today. We will have in our show notes links to your work, your upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation information, all of the great stuff that you are doing. The other thing that I found in the book that I just really enjoyed were all of the pictures, the plates. And there's just some amazing color photos there. I thought that plate number 14, the gold octagonal-footed cup, the chalice, was just stunning. Sometimes we think of shipwrecks as being laden with treasure. That's not how a maritime archaeologist really views these things. You write about the shipwrecks as much more than just disasters, much more than just treasure troves, but they're memorials to those past. There's sometimes even opportunities for communities near them to bond and to rally. How has your understanding of all these roles changed over your decades of work on shipwrecks?
I first became associated with shipwrecks as a historical subject, and then as a young budding archaeologist was introduced to my first wreck, which was fascinating. I ultimately joined the government and became somebody who looked after wrecks and helped protect them, but also was looking at what it took to see the designation of some of these as some of the more important historic wrecks in the country or the most archaeologically significant. But through all of that, and particularly with my work with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, you are introduced to what it means to other people.
Mhm.
People who love to dive them for the challenge, people who like to find them for the fun of exploration and discovery, people who like to fish off of them because they are artificial reefs that attract all sorts of marine life, to the biologists who look at what's there. And to that end, I mean, until Titanic was found and they began to really study, well, the byproduct of bacteria eating the metal. And that Titanic halimoni, well, if shipwreck exploration is an undersea version of Star Trek, not only are you boldly going where none or few have gone before,
Yeah.
you're not only finding evidence of our own civilizations, you're also seeking out new life. And so that's the power of shipwrecks in so many ways, whether it's as an inspiration to culture, whether it's to dive it, whether it's to see it as a habitat, or for some others to recover that which was lost, either for salvage or as archaeologists. It has so many meanings. And that's what I really wanted to say in this book
Mm.
is I'm not going to presume to tell you what this and this only is in terms of, wow, that's it. That's the most important thing. I want everybody to read this and pick what they find the most fascinating about shipwrecks. And in that, see that there are others that agree with you.
Yeah, so many are excited by your work and have benefited so much. The one story in your book that, of course, jumped out at me, being you're living here on the East Coast, close enough to some of the Outer Banks area and North Carolina, is the story that you tell about Clotilda and its archaeology, how it revealed this brutality of slave trade. I wonder, how do you approach these wrecks that are so filled with emotional and cultural weight? Because that's a challenge unto itself, I would imagine.
It is. But bear in mind that as an archaeologist, what I do is I study ships, right? And I study the things in ships. But at the heart of archaeology is the study of people. That's what it's all about. And I'm an archaeologist because, frankly, I like people. I'm fascinated by people. And I'm always interested in what archaeology tells us about us as humans. So whether that's a good story or a bad story, it's all part of what it is to be human. And so in this case, with Clotilda, here's a ship that is the last known vessel to come to America when slavery is legal, but the trade in humans to be sold into slavery coming to the United States has been banned by Congress, and it has been for 52 years. And yet it persists as an illegal trade. And this vessel arrives with some 110 people directly from Africa. The story ultimately emerged in the media, was
Mhm.
denied at first, but ultimately by the end of the 19th century, the perpetrators are saying, yes, it happened. But also importantly, some of these folks who remained in the Mobile, Alabama area were telling their stories, not only to their families, but to some reporters and ultimately to Zora Neale Hurston. That tale goes national. And yet with that, and with this story being told, there were those who said, didn't happen. And you still get some folks who say, nah, this didn't happen. And yet it did. The physical survival of the ship in the Mobile River came because the captain, immediately after transferring his captives off and onto a nearby steamer under the cover of midnight, burned it and sank it. But he burned it fast and it sank even faster. So the bulk of the hull was preserved in this cold, occasionally warm, but constantly shifting water of the Mobile River. Marine organisms can come in through the saltwater intrusion of Mobile Bay, but then the fresh water comes down, and so they don't last long enough to eat all of the wood. And so sealed in the mud, much of Clotilda, even charred from the fire that he lit, was there and preserved. And our job wasn't to say it was real or not. We knew it was because the families all said it was. And the ship existed in the historic record. Where it was the question. And to that end, there were some who knew where it was. In fact, the wreck sits directly off of the property of those who actually hired it and perpetrated the crime. But it was being able to precisely say in that CSI kind of way, and that's one of the roles of shipwreck archaeology, yeah, that's it. With that, it has been a profound experience. And I do have to do a shout out to the Smithsonian. We worked closely with the National Museum of African American History and Culture, with the Shipwrecks Project, and with our colleagues there, both at the museum and the larger project, and with the community, as well as the Alabama Historical Commission and many others. I think what made it all the more powerful for me is the fact that in diving this ship, because it is preserved to the extent it is, for the very first time, we were able not only to see the remains of a slave ship, and there have been a few other wrecks, but they're scattered pieces on a bottom or a pile of rock ballast, where these people were stacked within a space no bigger than 500 square feet, 110 people in a space about as big as the room I'm in. And there's no other way to describe it other than to say that you feel the claustrophobia, you feel the closed-in space, and then you can just imagine yourself there, because it's not an image, it's not a story, you're there. And I know that feeling of you're there, whether it's on the boat deck of the Titanic or on the deck of Arizona or in so many other ships that I've dived on. The years bleed away. And even though there's time and change and corrosion and some loss, it's still that ship. And so for us, all of us that worked on the project, I think it was profound, particularly because we were working closely with the descendants. And they, at every step, were not only briefed, but were involved in the decisions.
Wonderful. Such a pleasure to speak with you, James P. Delgado, Smithsonian Associate, author of this wonderful book, The Great Museum of the Sea. Will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up. Why Shipwrecks Capture the Imagination. Lots more will be unveiled, I know, during your presentation. I just encourage our audience to check out this great book. We'll have links so that our audience can find out more about the book, more about your upcoming Smithsonian Associates presentation, of course, more about you. But James P. Delgado, what a pleasure it's been to talk with you. Thank you. Congratulations on this book and all of your work. Be well. We look forward to seeing you at Smithsonian Associates coming up.
Thank you, and be well.
That was Smithsonian Associate James P. Delgado, maritime archaeologist, storyteller of the deep, and author of The Great Museum of the Sea. As Dr. Delgado reminds us, shipwrecks aren't just broken vessels. They're human history preserved in salt and silence. They are art, memorial, cautionary tale, and sometimes even hope. If today's conversation moved you, intrigued you, or reminded you just how much the past still floats beneath us, there's more where that came from. Visit us at notold-better.com to hear this episode again or to explore our full library of shows. You can follow us on social media. We're at Twitter at NotOldBetter and Instagram at NotOldBetter, where we share more stories that matter to you and your families. Thanks for joining us today to hear James P. Delgado, Smithsonian Associate. He will be appearing at Smithsonian Associates coming up. Check out our show notes for more details about Dr. Delgado and his wonderful book, The Great Museum of the Sea, as well as his upcoming presentation at Smithsonian Associates. This is a production of NOBS Studios. I'm Paul Vogelsang. Thanks for spending time with us today. Hope you'll join me again next time for the Smithsonian Associates interview series from the Not Old Better Show on radio and podcast. Thanks, everybody. Be well, be safe. Let's talk about better. The Not Old Better Show on radio and podcast. We will see you again next time.